Hey guys, this is part 2 of DIY 3D printer build, and I'm going to show you guys how to build it. So let's go ahead and jump right in. Alright guys, so in this episode of Custom Carbros on the 3D printer build, this is a DIY project. Go see part 1, which is less DIY, more like of the experimental part of it. But in this episode, we're going to be focusing 100% on the DIY process, starting with building the extruder mount and stuff like that. But anyways, let's go ahead and without further ado, jump on in. Alright guys, so to start off, let's go ahead and assemble the extruder assembly. Now for this part, you're going to need 2 M3x15 screws. I believe that's what those are right there. You can use nuts, you don't have to, because I figured out that the parts printed a little bit tight, so it just tap right into them. You'll also need, if you're using standard, just a standard 632 bolts, 2 of those as well. And I'm going to use the 1-inch long just because it's a little bit easier for me. As you can see right here, we got 2 of those as well. And those, now let's go ahead and start the assembly process. Alright, so to start off this assembly process, you want to take this piece right here, as well as the heatsink for the E3D V6 hot end. Let me get you focused. You're going to put those both together, and you're going to have to kind of push to get them nice and snug. And then you take your M3 bolts, and you put them through right here, and you tighten them down. Once you got that as tight as you want, you go ahead, and you're going to take this part, which has been remixed. It was originally designed by this guy right here, and it's a great part. I really like the fit and print and everything. I just printed all these white stuff out of PLA as well. Most of this printer is printed out of PLA. But basically, you're going to take this, and there's 2 screw holes here, and then you have 2 options. You can either put it up here on this line of row or this line of row right here. Now, I want it to be higher up so we have more up and down build service, so I'm going to put it on the top set, and you just put a screw through here. But I like to go through the back, as you can see right here. Now that you got that, you can go through and finally torque these things down right here. Or if they're not quite tight enough, you can use M4 hardware as well. Or there's even a T-slot for the nuts at the back, or not a T-slot, just a hex slot, so that way you can fit the nuts in the back and they'll be held while you tighten it up. Now, here's another great upgrade for this printer, and that is this 3 fan shroud. This one's taken apart, but it'll clip right on and it works perfect. I'll be using that, and this is actually printed out of ABS. The fan shroud is because it needs to withstand higher temperatures. Now let's go ahead, move on, and we'll mount this to the actual printer. Alright, so now we're going to go ahead, take this assembly right here, and we're just going to clip it on. Now there should be 3 bearings, 1 at the bottom, 2 at the top. And then it'll just go into these slots right here. This one is a nice design. It clips right on, and it's just perfect. Now we got the top on. Let's do the bottom. And there we go. Alright, so now if you didn't already put this thing in right here, it's just a little coupler for the PTFE tube. You can just thread that in nice and simply like so. Once you get it nice and in, you can take your actual PTFE tube right here, which is either blue or white depending on what kit you get. But as you can see right here, the end has been smashed. So as you can kind of see, it's smashed down right here. So what you need to do, take a razor knife, and you simply find a hard surface, and you try to cut it as flat as possible. Alright, so I went ahead and cut this so it's a little bit more flesh, because it was, not flesh, more circle. Don't know what flesh means. But let's go ahead, push this in, and you should be able to push it in until it gets too hard to push at all. So that's too far in to push. Is about 1.5 inches in. Make sure the coupler's nice and tight, and boom, we got our PTFE tube ready as well. Alright guys, so for the LCD assembly, I went ahead and took some 632 bolts, and I actually tapped these holes right here, and I just used 2 screws, 1 right there, and 1 in the bottom corner, and now this big printed part should just be able to slide on kind of like so. And you can use the other end, which is this short small piece right here, and put it on the back side as well. And once you get that, you can put a bolt at the back and tighten it on up. And you can put this anywhere basically on the frame, any corner you want. I recommend putting it in the front right bottom corner, which is mainly where LCDs are on most printers. once you get that, you can take a wrench and tighten them up, but I don't have the right size, so I'll just avoid it for right now. Besides, I might end up moving this higher up or lower down depending on where I decide to go with it. But a quick tip is to make sure you plug the wires into the LCD. There should be 2, and those are going to go to our Arduino Mega and ramp setup, which we're moving on right now. Alright, so for 3D printer boards, there's basically 2 options that you have a choice of in this specific assembly. There's the ramps and Arduino combination. Basically, this just clips on to these little pins, go into there and clips in. Or there's the Arduino Mega integrated into a ramps board. This is just basically both of those laid out onto one board. I like this just a little bit better. It makes it a little bit skinnier and just makes it a little bit tidier. Now, as you can see right here, we're going to use this board. We're not going to use this. We may if we end up burning out this board, but I recommend this board if you're interested in a good looking board and just interested in specs. Now the other board, the Arduino Mega and ramps combo, is a great set if you're really trying to be on a budget. In other words, you can get this combo for like 12 bucks, whereas this board right here, you're spending more money, about $20. I don't think there's a huge performance difference. I just like these ones a little bit better just because they're laid out more and it's just easier for everything else. So we're going to be using this one. Like I said, I already put these on, but I'm going to show you guys, take one off and show you guys how to put these on. So let's zoom right on in. Alright, so when the board comes in, it's going to be missing these things. It's just going to have 3 wires right there. Now I'm going to take these jumpers that come with the board, sorry if it's shaking, and clip them in. You should have 3 of these. This is a huge step that I kept missing when I was building my printer, and then it didn't want to work. Now if you look at this closely, you guys can't really see it, or if you flip it over, there are tons of words that say like step direction. Make sure you match it up with the words that are on your stepper motor driver so you get it the right direction. So this board will be linked down in the description below on the Thingiverse page. And that's basically it for the assembly. I even put a heatsink on right here onto this. That was just in case, and I also recommend that you get a couple extra drivers because these things like to burn out. Now that we got that, we can basically just put it where we want it, and since we have foam underneath this, we can just set it there, or if you want, you can push the pins in to give it a little bit of grab, but I'm just going to set it right here, because this is just testing the electronics. Now let's go ahead and move on to the power supply. Alright, so for the power supply, we got a 12 volt 30 amp power supply, linked down on the Thingiverse page, like the majority of this stuff, but anyways, this one's got a switch wired up to it right now. It simply just wires right on in. As you can see, there's blue goes to the neutral and yellow to ground, and red goes to L, which I don't know what L means, but yeah. But anyways, basically that's just set up. You don't have to use a switch. You can just have it when you plug it in. It starts. This way I like it though because it'll have a quick disconnect. Now this plastic piece right here won't work for this printer unless you really decide to leave this bottom open, which I might or might not. I'm not quite sure. But basically this power supply has 2 wires coming from the positive and negative side of this thing, and they're going to go ahead and they're going to wire up on this board. Let me show you how. Alright, so this 2 pins right here, you can see it says 12 volt positive and 12 volt negative on this side. Now it's kind of hard to see, but basically it just goes in like that and screws right on in. Tighten it till it's nice and snug and give them a pull. Make sure they don't come out because you don't want to start a fire on your homemade 3D printer. Alright, so now the 2 wires that came from the LCD, we can basically just plug on in. Now it's kind of just guessing right now unless you look at the back of your LCD screen, because it'll say EXP1 and EXP2, and it'll say the same on the board, and you just kind of got to wire them up just like so. So that's all set up. Now let's go ahead and plug in our power supply. Alright, so now because I'm using this switch setup, it's got this fancy little cord just like the Ender 3. Now let me try to keep my hands out of the way, it's kind of tough, but you get it plugged in and power on. Alright, so now as you can see, the board is on, the light's on right here. Usually when you power it on, there'll be like 3 or 4 LEDs that'll turn on and then turn back off. and one will stay on. Now make sure your screen is on, like I said. If not, you'll burn out your screen and your main board. So if it's not on, turn your printer off as soon as possible and plug in the LCD screen. This board I used on my last printer, so it did have the Marlin firmware already on it. So basically this is set up and ready to go, but it's not really. Alright, so now let's go ahead and start hooking up these axes. Now like I said, there's 2 axes for the Y, but there's only 1 plug, so you're going to need one of these jumper thingies. This thing is for X-axis, Z-axis, tons of different, whatever you want it for basically, and it'll just plug right on in. Now I can't really hold it up and show you and hold the camera, but there we go, just like so. Now you'll have 2 of these that'll come in a kit, which will be linked on the Thingiverse page. You're going to need both of them because you're going to need 2 for the Y and 2 for the Z. Now for the X, I didn't really show you guys, but I already had the wires plugged in on it, and the X will just plug right on in. The X belts haven't been hooked up, not the other side, the Y hasn't either, but we will get on that in a minute. Right now we're just worried about plugging in all the wires. Now we have 2 more wires, which are for the Y-axis motors. Now I'm just going to plug them in, so that way they're both going opposite directions, because this one, it Y's them, but they both go opposite directions. So make sure you get it where they're both going the right direction. And just do that for both of the Y-axis motors. Now as you can see, not really see actually because my hand's in the way. Let me focus in on it. So the red is on the outside, and this one we want it to do the actual opposite, which looks like it's the same. I'm not sure actually if it's this way or the other way. For now, I'll just put it the other way, because I'm pretty sure it had to be the opposite. And now that's it for the Y-axis and the X-axis on the motherboard. Now let's move up to actually plugging in the motors. Alright guys, so for now we're going to go ahead and open up another end stop right here. Now, I did glue on this in the last episode. I did glue on an end stop for the Y-axis, but that was a mistake because of one reason. It didn't work. The way it was set up, it would just bind before it even hit that, so that's not a good thing. Once you get it out of the bag, you got this little piece right here. You got the switch and the wires, and you can go ahead and actually plug them in. It's kind of hard for me to show you guys because my camera is focused on something else, but just plugs in. It's the simplest connection really you make because it's just so easy. There's no way you can mess it up. So basically, we're going to take this right here. This is a 3D printed part that's also linked down with the Thingiverse page. It's the end stop mount. Now this basically goes on right here, and this switch goes right here, and they're both go through the holes on the end stop. They're just, I think, M3. Yeah, they're M3, and we're going to go ahead, take 2 M3 and get that done. Now one reason I like these boards is because it's super straightforward. Those are all the end stop pins, whereas the Arduino Mega and Ramps combo don't really show you. Now there are tons of forums that show you exactly what is what, but still I recommend this. Now if you look on it, there's an X negative plus, or X plus, and then Y negative and Y plus. Now you're going to want to put this in the negative Y, and then once you plug it in, you come on over here and you push the switch, and if the red light comes on, that means you got it wired the right way. Now if you push the switch and the red light doesn't come on, now flip your wires opposite way on the motherboard, and then that should help. And if it doesn't turn them on, then you may have a bad switch, and you might want to test it before you actually go risking your printer. Alright, so we're going to need all the X pulley assembly parts. Now there's a couple here. The actual printed parts, there's only 2, and I've got them in 2 different colors. It's just kind of random, and I just kind of chose it. It doesn't really matter. But to start off, you're going to put a bolt through this white piece right here down at the bottom, as you see right here, and I glued the top so it's easier to tension and untension. Now once you got that like that, you're going to take this spring right here, and you're going to drop it down this middle of the hole right here. Just drops right in, pushes through. Now this is going to sit like this, so make sure that it's facing up and down, just like so. And then you'll take your wing nut. If you're using M3, it'll look different, or maybe it won't. I don't really know. I'm not usually using metric, but then spin it on up. Once you get it to about this stage, you're all set. Alright, so once you get to this stage, you just set this in here, and it's a tight fit, and you drop a bolt in. Now it could be 6 or 4 millimeter or whatever size, and you just put a nut on the other side, and then once you get that, that's ready for mounting. Now there are 2 poles right here on this other side. Sorry for the shaking, I'm holding it by hand because I can't get my tripod right here. And it just clips right in, and it should just slide. Now there's 2 screw things right here, and only one on this side. That's because I messed up in the design. But basically you can clamp this to make it tighter. I don't see a need to because it's a pretty tight fit. But basically you can just push it on the more you need or whatever. I'm just leaving it out about a ½ an inch away right here. So let's go ahead and pin the belts in so you can get this axis moving. Alright, so let's go ahead and do the belts on this thing. Now I kind of started doing it, but let me undo it and show you guys what you need to do. Basically, take your belt, go between the belt and the bar. Now this is kind of a weird spot. Maybe I'll change the design in the future, but for now it's just fine. And we're gonna go ahead and take it all the way through onto the other side and do the same. Loop it around our pulley setup. You just fish it right on back. It doesn't have to go all the way back, just has to go to this white part right here. I wish I could just focus it and show you guys. So just gotta go to this white part because we'll loop it right now and then we will hook it on. Now there's these 2 little pins right here that pop out, and basically just gonna loop the belt into a loop shape and put 2 zip ties on it, or just 1, it's up to you. And then once you get a nice loop with the zip tie, you can just go ahead and cut off the end. I'm just gonna keep it on for now, might as well, because I can always tighten it up and make it nice and tight. Now for this other end, this end right here, it's just gonna roll up the motor just roughly, like over the top here, kind of rigged, but it'll just go to the second one right here and just cut it where you think is gonna be long enough. I do not like cutting belts because it's just so risky. But then you're gonna get it about perfect and create a loop and then put a zip tie on it as well. Now we got it all basically set up for this x-axis, but there is tons of play here, and that's where we go onto the other side and we tighten up our tensioner. Alright, let's go ahead and assemble this extruder. Let's start from the basics. There's just 2 parts. There's this one right here and this one right here. They're the only printed parts, and then whatever extruder you decide to go with. Basically this will just sit right on, and then you could put this metal piece on that most extruder setups have. Now you can even print your own extruder assembly, but I don't really recommend it because you're gonna put this thing through a lot of stress. I may even have to print some of these parts out of PETG or ABS, but I'm not sure. So let's just get these screws started. Alright, so once you get it assembled, it should look like this. Now let's go ahead and mount it to the aluminum. Alright, so I'm going to mount it in this left back corner, and it should just mount anywhere, how you want it. I'm going to do it about 8 inches off, so about right here. And then you just use the other side that you should have printed, and it'll just coupling it, and it should hold it. So let's go ahead and mount it on up, and we'll see what it does. Alright, so while we were actually testing it, we actually realized that this assembly for the tensioning isn't the best design, and it really does not like to hold up. So what we're going to actually do is take this one apart. Let's go ahead and jump onto assembling the other pulleys. Alright guys, so let's go ahead now and assemble these tensioners. Now to start off, you just take this piece, one of these, as well as one of these pulleys. That's all you need to build this. To start off, grab yourself your 1.5 inch long bolt, your about 3 1/4 long spring, and then you just slip, well actually, the bolt goes through this black tensioner first, goes through this black part right here, and then the spring goes on the end, and then you drop it into the carriage. Then you just push, and it'll pop out the other side, and then you can pull it down. But then you can take your wing nut right here and just put it on and start twisting it. Alright, so just like that, we finally got it in, and it's starting to sit in that counteractive hole. Now you can push on it and it'll go in, and that's as well. You can push it down and tighten that up if you need to, but this one went really good. So now you're going to take your 1 inch long bolt right here, start putting it in, but don't put it in all the way, and then take your pulley. Now this pulley right here, design those, they're really simple, and they just slip in, and then just like this, and you push it through. And then take a lock nut so it doesn't come undone, and twist it on. Now if you don't have a lock nut, you can actually choose a regular nut and put some super glue at the end. That'll work just fine. Now grab your pliers and tighten it up. And once you're done, you'll get it like this, and this is the final thing. Make sure your pulley spins freely. If not, you may need to use a smaller sized bolt. For these, they're just 632 bolts all around, but you can use M4 and it'll fit in the holes perfectly. So that's all assembled. Now let's go ahead, put it down right here, and let's just snap, and we'll have ourselves 2 of them. Just like. Alright, so we got those bolts assembled. Now let's go ahead and actually mount them. Alright guys, now let's go ahead and assemble this belt setup right here. So to start off, you're going to take 2 of these spacers right here. They're 9mm spacers. I think they're 25mm tall. And you just slip them on. They're going to slip on really easy, and they don't have to be a tight fit. Once you get those done, you're going to take your actual tensioner assembly that we assembled just a minute ago, and you're going to start putting it on. Now you can leave it off if you want, but basically you're just going to feed the belt through the bottom, loop it over the top, and start sliding it in. Looks like mine's a little tight on the fitment side, so we're going to take a flathead screwdriver, put it in that little notch right there, and just pry it up a bit. And once you get that, you should be good to go. So we're just going to slip that on like so and feed the belt through. And once you get that, you can just pull it on tight. And now I just got to re-loop over here by right there. But that's basically how you assemble the Y carriage assembly. So let's go ahead and tie that belt down. Alright guys, so now we're going to go ahead and make the wood for the bottom. Now you can use any material you want, but aluminum's really expensive, so I'm not going to use that. I'm going to use some wood. So basically, the dimensions are linked on Thingiverse. It's just a picture that shows you the dimensions. You kind of got to notch out for these things right here. And if you use square tubing all around, you're going to have to do it different, because this is why I used the L right here, so the wood will set into it, and then I can screw onto it. Now basically, I'm just going to go ahead and jump to the wood shop and cut it up. If you have any questions, make sure you comment them down below. Let's go ahead, jump into the workshop. Alright guys, so now let's go ahead and test it on the printer. Alright guys, we fit the board in there, and it's not quite the fit I was hoping for, but it works good enough. Now let's go ahead and clean this off. It's got a little bit of sawdust on it, so we'll just blow it off real quick, and then we'll start mounting some stuff to it. Alright, so to start off, we're going to mount the motherboard. Now, it's up to you which order you do these in. I'm just starting with this one because it's just kind of an important thing to mount. So, to start off, basically, you're just going to put it where you want it. Push down with some pressure and trace where you want each one of the holes to be. Then, the reason this one's so far up as well is so that way that I can plug into this port without having to reach all the way in, and just kind of because we got to mount our Z-axis over there some more, and we want to have as much room for the Z-axis, so we're just going to do this for now. So now you're going to go ahead, take your drill, and drill a couple holes. Oh, it doesn't look like we're going to be able to get that one in, which is 100% okay. So, blow that off. Now let's go ahead, put our board back on, and get some hardware and mount it. You can use whatever hardware you want, depending on how big you drilled your holes. Now, if you really want to, you can use the nut and bolt technique as well. I recommend using log nuts so it won't move later. I'm just going to use some 632 hardware because that's what I have. It's cheaper, and I think it's about right. Alright, so that's all mounted and it's nice and snug. Now you don't even have to mount a motherboard, you can even hot glue it on, which is just fine. But anyways, let's go ahead now and actually move on to the Z-axis. Alright guys, so for this part we're going to go ahead and we're going to take our T8 nut as well as 4 M3 8mm long bolts, and we're going to also take our 2 linear bearings, and we'll go ahead and press the bearings into these bigger holes right here. There's 2 of those, so make sure you press them in You also will have to probably press in this thing right here. Just make sure that all the 4 holes are lined up with the 4 holes in the model, as you can see right here. This one may be loose enough that you can really just drop it in, but doesn't look like it. Some printers are going to be more precise than others. Mine kind of like to get a little bit of elephant's foot and doesn't like to have it set in properly. But anyways, we're going to go ahead, move over here to this vise, and we're just going to press them all in. So let's go ahead and do that. But that's basically it. So let's go ahead and we'll show you what we're going to do next. Alright guys, so now we're going to go ahead and cut some C-metal that goes from there to there. Now this is just aluminum C-metal that I got from Ace Hardware, and it says on it 4/3/8 plywood. Now it's kind of a standard size, so if you can't find it, just find some C-metal that's roughly like 13.5 millimeters by 13.5 millimeters with the inner diameter of, I think, 10.5 by 9.5. So it's kind of a pain if you're in metric, but if you're in the United States, just get some standard 4/3/8 plywood. It's just some simple C channel. I got that from Ace Hardware. But as you can see in the parts, there are these C slots, and basically we're gonna go ahead and cut an 8-inch piece that'll tuck about 1 inch into each one of these, and that'll create the bed's frame. And now as you can see as well, there's these tiny holes, and those are going to be for the leveling because they line right up with the standard Creality Ender 3 bed. But anyways, let's go ahead, cut a couple of 8 inches, attach them, and make sure everything lines up, and then we'll continue from there. Alright, so now that we got those cut, we just kind of push them in like, oh, looks like that worked. Alright guys, so for the Z-axis, you're going to need 2 of these huge parts right here, and make sure you remove the supports. I still got to do that on both of them. But anyways, you're also going to need 4 of these 8mm rods. They're just about 11 inches long. And basically, you can just hammer them right on in. Now, to make sure if you're doing it taller printer or shorter printer, just go from here, touch the bottom, and up here at the top, you have it about the height of the nozzle, because you don't want the nozzle to accidentally hit this while it's printing. So make sure you get it just right. And with that, let's go ahead, hammer this in, remove the supports, and we'll continue from there. Alright guys, so now we're going to go ahead and cut the all thread for this. Now this is a 500mm rod. I don't know how many exact inches, but now we're going to go ahead and cut it right in half, and that should be close to the right height. Now, I'm not quite sure how close it's going to be to the nozzle. It may not be perfect. We may have to do some testing and designing, but I'm going to cut this one in half, which I'm really lucky, and I'm glad that I found this one exactly. But make sure once you cut it that you use a grinder or something to clean up the top, because it's got to be really fine to get it started. As you can see right here, it's really fine and really smooth. So make sure you sand it up nice, because if not, it will not work. So make sure you do that, and let's go ahead and let's get it done. Alright, so now that we got those cut, you can see them right here. We're going to stick them right on in and tighten this coupler down a little bit, or untighten it, I should say. Push it on in till it's tight, and then tighten it back up. Take this part right here. Oops. And, I keep bumping the camera, sorry about that. And now it'll just drop right on through and over. Just like that. Alright, so now we're going to take our M3 by M8 nuts, and we're going to go ahead, bolts, and we're going to go ahead and drop them in and tighten them up. And once you get it tight, you don't need too many screws. I just use 2, and that's one assembled. Let's go ahead and do the other one. Alright guys, so now we went ahead and we just set it onto our thing. Now neither one of these are bar connected or screwed onto anything. It's just set there, and if you twist the nuts or the bolts, they go up and down, and that's perfect. Now let's go ahead and put this on the actual 3D printer. Alright, so to start off, we're going to go ahead, take our tape measure, and mark the center. So the whole thing should be close to 18 inches long. If I can get my tape measure to stay. Oh, it's 17.5. So, not quite 9, about 9 5/8-ish. I don't know. I'm not very perfect in math, but that's good enough for me. And then we're going to do that same marking over here. And now I'm going to go ahead and take this square piece of aluminum right here and line it up with the mark from both of the lines. And let's trace it. And just like that, we're all centered. So now we can go ahead and set on the printer bed. Alright guys, that'll be a wrap for part 2. See you guys in the next one.